Hey everybody, welcome back. What we are going to be going over today is an overview of RESTful APIs of Cloud Endpoints, which is one of the Google managed services, and we'll kind of ease you into how we can start using these types of services, these types of really general software construction techniques to build service-oriented applications. Now, what we're going to start off with here is the notion of an API. So my guess is that at this point in your careers, with the exception of some, you're all grad students, a lot of you are working, you probably have dealt with a software package before that you have to call. And if you're an undergrad in this class, I know I've got some of you as well, you probably have pulled down a module or a package or something of that nature, and you have had to interact with it, right? So you pull down a Java Swing, or you've implemented a Java Swing application. You have pulled down a Python module that you are calling and interacting with. Do you just say import the thing and it's good to go? No, you have to actually call its API. Now, an API, or an application programming interface, is something that gives you, the developer, or you, the user, some nice, clean, easy way to interact with a very complicated application. And I say very complicated, it could be not complicated at all. Basically, it's just a nice, clean front end to talk to. And if you're a user, you're seeing probably a nice GUI, which is abstracting away all the horribly complicated things that you're doing behind the scenes. If you are a developer, you're calling an API to interact with some particular application. Let's take Python for an example. So you download the scikit-learn package in Python and you start doing machine learning, you start doing, highly complicated matrix math or, various processing types of things that you can do with scikit. Okay, you need to understand what data structures to create. You need to know which functions to call. You basically need to know how to interact with this module. The idea of an API is the same thing. We are calling functions, so we see our nice clean interface here, and whichever function we call is going to lead us to some module behind the scenes. Right? So if we're importing scikit-learn, we're calling basic training and labeling functions, right? You don't have to understand how the machine learning algorithms work. You just know that you're calling basic training on this data set, right? All of that's happening behind the scenes. That's part of that module. That's part of that program. And kind of the nice thing, at least from a software engineering perspective, is that this is a very clean separation of concerns, right? I can have a nice interface. I can change anything on the back end as long as I satisfy the constraints of the API. The user doesn't know, or the programmer doesn't know that anything has changed, right? Maybe you've added an optimization such that your program runs 10 times faster. Your program being your module behind the scenes here. The user or the programmer is still calling the exact same functions with the exact same parameters because you are satisfying this contract or basically this interface that you have specified and developed. Now, can this interface change over time? Absolutely. That's why we do things like specify version numbers for our modules. Those of you that have played around with the Cloud Functions page at all thus far, you've probably noticed that you're picking a particular version of Node.js, so Python, what else is up there? C# and Java. You can pick specific versions, meaning that based on whatever is defined for that language at that point in time, you know how to interact with it. Right? Node.js 10 can be quite different from 12 and 14, depending on which functions you need to call, right? It's kind of the exact same idea here. So hopefully I don't need to sell you on the benefits of an API. Okay, it's a little bit of extra work if you're developing something, but you get that nice clean separation. So enough of a background on API. How does this function in the cloud? At this point, you may or may not have used a RESTful API intentionally. You probably have interacted with it in some way. And the easiest way to really understand what REST gets you, and this is representational, I've got my note here, representational state transfer. That's what the algorithm stands for. It's like a URL. Okay, that's all this thing really is. We are interacting with some application or some service via what looks like a standard HTTP URL. So this is an API where I could say, let's take for example, I've got a sensor. Okay, so I've got my scale, my Wi-Fi enabled scale here. It's the phone. I've got Kirby. Okay, if I want to figure out the weight of Kirby here, I would talk to my scale via a RESTful API. Well, what would that look like? I would have an IP address or a domain name that I would access this server on, right? This device. So let's call it a local IP address. So it's http://192.168.1.10. Okay, that could be the ID of this scale. Slash get data slash get weight. And then because this scale understands that it is serving RESTful calls, it would go out, it would talk to the sensor and say, okay, Kirby, well, he's fluffy. He weighs like less than a few grams or 20 grams or however much this little ball of fluff weighs. But the point is that I told this object to go get information and it would return it to me in probably a text format or a JSON format or some format we agree upon. But at the end of the day, it's just a get or post or put or delete call. So this is one way that we can handle interacting with services in a network-based environment. I could use a network of sensors and I could query a central server, get data slash 5 slash temperature. And then sensor number 5 would return temperature data from where it is sitting in the room or in your yard or wherever. Basically, this is just another way to interact with services, and it being a nice network, well understood based approach, we can leverage this for our services. You will see lots of microservices in this class use this exact API. If you are doing IoT based applications, you probably will use something RESTful at some point in time. Can we use authentication with this? Absolutely. We can set OAuth tokens. We can interact with our service accounts if we're doing things inside of Google Cloud. Basically, we can do anything we need to do with a typical API, we can do it RESTfully. Now, one thing to mention, this is not a Google specific thing. REST is a very commonly accepted standard. You can implement this yourself in any programming language you want. But because it's so well understood, it's absolutely worth keeping in mind. So why are we talking about all these basics in here? The reason why we need to talk about REST and APIs is that sometimes you don't want to do it yourself. You don't want to set up the servers. You don't want to set up the calls to manage them. You just want somebody else to manage that service. And again, this is kind of taking the platform, making it a managed service. That's what we did before with App Engine, with Cloud Functions and that kind of thing. Here we're just offloading the RESTful API calls. So by sending this to allow Google to manage, say, we can define our interfaces up there, and we can let the cloud provider handle authentication. We can let them handle scalability, let them handle logging and monitoring, basically all of the common infrastructure type tasks that you'd have to manually do. Same notion of why we're putting up virtual machines here rather than running our own local VMware server or something of that nature, right? We're letting somebody else manage the headaches. And what this leads us to is their particular setup called Cloud Endpoints. I'll get my mouse out of the way here. Basically, this is the service that will handle APIs for us. We get protection via authentication, authorization. We can use web tokens. We can use OAuth. We can use service accounts, our common security concerns we can use here. We get a very nice monitoring and logging interface similar to everything you see in all the other services. Little logging tab, little monitoring tab. You can see exactly what's going on there. The nice thing too, though, which makes this one a little bit different from some of the others, is that we can integrate third-party services. We're not specifically tied to the Google ecosystem here. So we can use our own framework, use our own language, And if we understand how to write an open API call, and this is a open standard that we could use, really anything could talk to a Google service via Cloud Endpoints. You see this little figure here, talking to iOS, talking to some application, talking to Android. Again, this is very, very customizable. Now, if you take a look at this figure here, sorry, I guess this is intended to be a JavaScript. I'm just reading this as a normal, any application. This should look pretty similar to our API slide a few moments ago, right? Here we have our interface, right? We have applications of varying types. So we've got two phone applications here. Maybe we have like a React application or a Python script or a C# or Java or. As long as we understand how to talk to Cloud Endpoints, which is hosting our RESTful API here, we can then interact with everything behind the scenes in terms of the cloud services that we know. Maybe we want to talk to App Engine or Compute Engine or Cloud Functions or any of these services that we've talked about thus far, which can then talk to backend services like our various storage options or our various analytics options. Basically, what Cloud Endpoints is giving us is the ability to have a centralized managed API service. And it is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're looking to, say, have locally deployed applications. It locally could be phone apps, or it could be web apps, or local executables. But you still need to talk to the cloud services in some way. Endpoints is one backdoor, not a backdoor, but it's one entry point into that system. So with this, again, this is more of the same that we see here, interface, management, logging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the things that we've talked about so far for other concerns, really. Only really different, so Open API, gRPC API, these are ways that we can define what the Cloud Endpoints definitions look like. And we'll do a lab on Cloud Endpoints to kind of help you along with these topics. But other than that, probably enough overview here thus far. Let's get you into some actual work with Cloud Endpoints. So hopefully you have fun with that. I know I will making the demo for you, so have a good time, everybody.